Welcome back to the deep dive. It's funny how sometimes the most iconic bit of kit for one country actually started life somewhere else entirely.
Oh, absolutely. And the journey it takes often tells you as much about politics and, well, sheer necessity as it does about the hardware itself.
Exactly. I'm Hari, and with me is Kimi. Today, we're digging into a really detailed set of documents covering the quite remarkable story of the McDonnell Douglas Phantom's time with the UK forces.
That's right, looking at both the Royal Navy and the Royal Air Force Service. It's a complex tale.
It really is. So, our mission today, if you like, is to unpack all that. Why did the UK pick this American jet? What made the British one so, well, British? And what were the highlights of its pretty varied career? We'll pull up the key stuff, maybe some surprises along the way. Ready to jump in?
Let's do it. So the story really kicks off. You need to understand the backdrop. Late 1950s, early 1960s. It was a really challenging period for the British aerospace industry.
Yeah, huge pressure, wasn't there? Economic, political. It led to all that consolidation, creating giants like BAC and Hawker Siddeley.
And they had some seriously ambitious projects on the go. The TSR-2 strike aircraft, which was incredibly advanced for its time, and the P.1154 vertical takeoff concept.
That P.1154 was fascinating, meant for both the RAF and the Navy, but the costs were spiraling, and the two services just couldn't agree on what they wanted from one airframe.
Exactly. And that put the Royal Navy in a really tight spot. They backed out of the P.1154, but they still desperately needed a new interceptor for fleet defense. Time was ticking.
So they started looking around, and the source material is pretty clear on why the U.S. Navy's F-4 Phantom stood out. I mean, first off, it was available. You couldn't just magic up a new British design overnight.
Crucially, for carrier operations, those twin engines were a huge plus. Redundancy over the sea.
Absolutely vital. And let's be honest, the initial cost looked lower compared to pushing ahead with increasingly expensive domestic options that were hitting roadblocks.
Then came the big political shift. A new Labour government, a major defense review in '65, and bang, they canceled both the P.1154 and the TSR-2.
Which just blew massive holes in the UK's future air power plans, and of course sent shockwaves through the aerospace industry back home.
And this is where you see how things get complicated. The RAF, who initially weren't, shall we say, overly enthusiastic about the Phantom for their needs like close air support, well, they ended up adopting it too.
It became part of a bigger picture, wasn't it? Tied into other U.S. aircraft buys, trying to manage the fallout from the cancellations, and crucially, ensuring some work still went to UK companies. It really shows how military buys are rarely just about the kit itself.
That political and industrial context is key because it leads directly to the Phantoms the UK got being, well, unique. To kind of cushion the blow of canceling British projects, a deal was struck for significant UK industrial contribution to the Phantom program.
And the biggest, most visible change, yanking out the standard American General Electric J79 engines and putting in Rolls-Royce Spey turbofans. Which sounds simple, but it really wasn't.
Not at all. The main reason, the core driver for this massive change, was performance specifically for the Royal Navy's carriers. They were smaller, less powerful catapults than the U.S. ones.
Right, so they needed better acceleration, better low-speed handling for launching and recovery.
Exactly. And fitting those physically larger Spey engines, well, it meant serious airframe surgery. The documents detail how the rear fuselage had to be made wider, deeper. The air intakes were enlarged quite dramatically.
Yeah.
You could spot a British Phantom a mile off because of it.
And that had knock-on effects, didn't it? Better low-speed performance, takeoff, climb rate, just what the Navy wanted, but...
But the trade-off was more drag.
Yeah.
So compared to the standard J79 Phantoms, the British ones were actually a bit slower at high altitudes. It's that classic engineering compromise. Optimize for one thing, you affect another.
Beyond the engines, there was other British kit involved too, like the Ferranti fire control system, built under license. Something like, 43% of the cost flowed back to UK industry?
That's the figure mentioned. And this all resulted in two initial UK versions. You had the F4K for the Navy, they called the FG.1, primarily for fleet air defense.
And then the F4M for the RAF, designated FGR.2. Its initial job description was more multi-role strike and reconnaissance.
Now, focusing on the Navy's FG.1s for a moment. Their service life was heavily shaped by, you guessed it, more defense cuts. The grand plan for several carriers evaporated, leaving HMS Ark Royal as basically the only carrier operating them for most of their time.
And getting them onto Ark Royal needed more tweaks. The undercarriage was beefed up significantly, and they had that incredibly distinctive long nose wheel leg.
Ah, yes, the extending oleo. 40 inches of extension, double the U.S. version. essential to get the right angle on the catapult for launch from those shorter decks. It's a small detail, but speaks volumes.
And here's a great little fact from the sources that long nose wheel helped an 892 Naval Air Squadron Phantom grab a transatlantic speed record during the Daily Mail air race in 1969. Pretty cool.
Definitely adds a bit of glamour. Though the Speys weren't all good news on deck, they ran incredibly hot, apparently, which caused problems. They had to fit special water-cooled jet blast deflectors on Ark Royal.
Right. And then, when Ark Royal finally paid off in 1978, the Navy's remaining Phantoms were just transferred over to the RAF. End of an era for naval fixed-wing flying, pretty much.
Meanwhile, over in the RAF, the FGR-2s, those multi-role jets, gradually found their main calling. They effectively took over the air defense interceptor role from the English Electric Lightning.
Which made sense, really. The Phantom just had much better legs range, plus a more powerful radar and could carry more missiles, much better suited for patrolling the big expanses of the North Sea and the GI-UK gap against Soviet bombers.
Yeah, they became the backbone of UK air defense, especially operating from northern bases like RAF Lukers. Lots of scrambles, lots of intercepts during the Cold War.
And here's something maybe less well known. The sources mention the FGR.2 squadrons, based in RAF Germany, actually had a tactical nuclear strike role under NATO, using American weapons.
That's right, part of that whole nuclear deterrent posture at the time. The FGR.2 also saw action, or rather post-action deployment, down south after the Falklands War in '82.
Getting them down there was an epic feat in itself, wasn't it? That huge long-range flight to Ascension Island, then operating from the quickly extended runway at RAF Stanley.
And they had to use arrestor gear for landing at Stanley, like landing on a carrier almost. Shows the adaptability needed in those situations.
Okay, so post-Falklands, there's this realization we need more air defense fighters, but getting brand new Spey engine Phantoms built wasn't really on the cards anymore.
No, the production lines were winding down or closed, so they went shopping. And this next bit is quite the story.
It really is. They ended up buying 15 used F-4J Phantoms directly from the U.S. Navy and Marine Corps stockpile, sourced from the famous Boneyard in Arizona, AMARC.
Literally pulling jets out of desert storage. These were refurbished, brought up to something near the U.S. F-4S standard, and entered RAF service as the F-4J UK. Their designation was F.3.
And they went to 74 Squadron at Wattisham. The sources have some brilliant little details here, like the crews initially having to wear American flight helmets because the British ones weren't compatible straight away.
And the paint. Apparently, the U.S. facility couldn't quite match the standard RAF gray. So the F.3's got this unique flint gray color. A small thing, but visually distinct.
It's interesting, though, despite not having the Spey engines, some pilots apparently rated the F-4J UK as maybe the best of the lot to fly in RAF service.
Yeah, part of that was down to the updated avionics. They had more modern digital systems compared to the older analog stuff in the Spey jets. Shows that engine power isn't everything. Sometimes the brains matter just as much.
So you have these three main types, FG.1, FGR.2, F.3, and even between the FG.1 and FGR.2, besides the obvious nose cone difference and initial rolls, there were subtle variations in avionics fits over time, wiring for reconnaissance pods or gun pods.
It was a complex fleet to manage. And like any high-performance jet, especially of that era, it wasn't without its problems. The accident rate, sadly, was significant. The sources state 55 were lost over the years.
Yeah, some tough incidents mentioned, like an FG.1 where the radome failed in flight, leading to a crash, or an FGR.2 accidentally firing a Sidewinder during an exercise. Stark reminders of the risks involved.
Ultimately, the Phantom's time came to an end with the post-Cold War drawdown. The options for changed defense reviews saw them phased out, mainly replaced by the Tornado F.3 for air defense, alongside the Sea Harrier.
But what a testament to its capability that, quote, often attributed to Sir Sidney Cam, the legendary Hawker designer. He apparently said no British aircraft could be called a success until it matched the Phantom. High praise indeed.
It really is. And it even had one last brief operational recall, providing air defense cover in the buildup to the first Gulf War, Operation Granby.
So, looking back, it's just this incredible 24-year saga, isn't it? An American jet bought almost out of desperation after British projects failed, gets fundamentally re-engineered with a British heart.
That's a Spey engines.
Serves the Navy from tiny carriers, becomes the RAF's main defender, gets reinforced with second-hand jets from the desert. It just adapted and endured through massive political and operational shifts.
It really underscores how military aircraft procurement is this messy, complex business. It's driven by politics, by industry needs, by budget cuts just as much as by pure performance requirements. The UK Phantom wasn't the plane they initially planned for, but it became utterly indispensable.
A truly unique British chapter for an American icon. It makes you think, doesn't it? How many other pieces of well-known military equipment have similar, perhaps less visible, stories of adaptation and compromise behind them? What political deals or canceled projects led to their existence?
That's a great point. The story beneath the surface is often just as fascinating as the operational history itself, a reminder that things are rarely as simple as they seem.
Absolutely. Well, that's all we have time for on this deep dive into the British Phantom. Thanks so much for joining us.
Yes, thank you for listening.